Okay, let's jump right in. I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine a world where, if you snapped your fingers, every single pencil in existence just vanished. Poof. Gone. You might be thinking, well, I've got a pen, no big deal, but think about what that actually means. Imagine a world where every single mark you make on a piece of paper is utterly, undeniably permanent. You make a mark and it is there forever. Mistakes literally cannot be undone. If you had to write absolutely everything in permanent ink, it would completely change how you think, wouldn't it? Honestly, it kind of turns into a bit of a nightmare when you really mull it over. It means zero rough sketches before starting a painting. It means you can't just erase that tiny math error halfway through a huge equation. No more scribbling wild, half-baked ideas in the margins of your notebook just to see if they work. That freedom to just experiment completely vanishes. To really understand the journey we've been on, we have to look at this stark contrast. 500 years ago, if you wanted to jot something down without using ink, your so-called pencil was literally just a primitive, messy chunk of charcoal that you held right in your bare hand. Your fingers would be pitch black, your parchment completely smudged. Now compare that to the magic little tool sitting on your desk right now. The graphite is safely locked inside this neat wooden casing, it doesn't stain your hands, and whenever it gets a little dull, you just give it a quick sharpen and you're back in business. It really is this perfect little symbol of creativity. So in this explainer, we're going to use this agenda as our map through time. We'll start before the modern pencil, look at the great graphite discovery, dive into how we engineered the perfect pencil, see how it's surviving the digital age, and wrap up with the philosophy of mistakes. Let's get to it. Starting off with Section 1, before the modern pencil, the era of temporary tools. The thing to remember here is that humanity has always needed to record things temporarily. We just didn't really have the engineering to pull it off well. Early humans used actual chunks of charcoal to draw those magnificent but super messy drawings on cave walls. Eventually, the Romans leveled up the tech a bit by using a sharp metal pen called a stylus to scratch into wax tablets. And then, moving into the Middle Ages, people were mostly relying on chalk and charcoal on slate boards. But the common thread? All these early writing tools were temporary. They weren't precise, they definitely weren't easy to carry around in your pocket, and they certainly weren't permanent, unless, you literally carve them into stone. Which brings us to Section 2, the Great Graphite Discovery, a storm in Borrowdale. This is such a wild little micro-narrative. A random storm literally changed the course of writing forever. In 1564, this incredibly violent storm swept through Borrowdale, England, and it was so powerful it completely uprooted this massive tree. When locals went to check out the damage, they looked under the huge roots and found this strange, shiny black stuff. Now, at first they thought it was coal, but it wouldn't burn. What they had actually stumbled upon was an incredibly pure, solid form of carbon that we now call graphite. The local shepherds quickly realized it left a really dark mark, so they actually started using it to tag their sheep. The catch was, pure graphite is super soft and brittle, and it makes your hands absolutely filthy. So eventually people figured out that if they wrapped these raw sticks tightly in string, or sheepskin or paper, they could use it to write without the mess. And that was it, the absolute earliest, rawest version of the pencil. Section 3, engineering the perfect pencil during the Industrial Revolution. Because here's the thing, raw graphite breaks way too easily. Fast forward to 1795, and a French inventor named Nicolas-Jacques Conté decides to tackle the problem. Conté came up with a brilliant three-step method. First, you completely pulverize the graphite into a fine powder. Second, you mix that powder with clay and water. And third, you fire the whole mixture in a blazing hot kiln. This was a massive game changer. Suddenly, graphite wasn't just a brittle rock you dug out of the dirt. It was a highly engineered material. And the best part? By tweaking the mix of graphite and clay, engineers found they could control exactly how dark or hard the pencil lead was. If you bump up the graphite ratio, you get a softer, darker mark, which is graded with a B. If you add more clay, you get a harder, lighter mark graded with an H. You know that classic yellow HB pencil you used in school? Well, that stands for hard black, perfectly balanced right there in the middle. It basically turned a simple stick of carbon into a true instrument of precision. But the pencil wasn't entirely perfected until 1858, when an American guy named Hymen Lipman had an absolute stroke of genius. He just attached an eraser directly to the end of the wooden casing. I mean, think about it. Having the ability to make marks and unmake them with one single tool, demand absolutely skyrocketed. Huge factories like Faber-Castell and Staedtler ramped up mass production, and this highly engineered little item turned into a universal, everyday commodity that basically anyone could afford. Moving on to Section 4, surviving the digital age, the modern context. So, how exactly does a piece of wood and clay survive in today's high-tech world? Well, its secret weapon is adaptability. Today, pencils come in a huge variety of forms. We've got mechanical pencils pumping out incredibly thin leads without ever needing a sharpener. We've got colored and watercolor pencils driving the fine arts. We even have smart digital pencils designed specifically to mimic that classic graphite feel on modern tablets. And to help tackle the very real environmental issue of deforestation, manufacturers are pivoting again, making eco-friendly pencils out of recycled paper and repurposed materials to help save trees. But there's a really incredible irony here that I want to pause on. Despite the absolute dominance of glowing screens, fancy digital styluses, and tablets practically taking over our lives, the classic, simple wooden pencil is still an absolute staple. It's truly a wooden survivor. You can walk into pretty much any classroom or office in the world today, and you are going to find a traditional wooden pencil. It doesn't need a battery, it doesn't need a firmware update, it just works. Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5, the philosophy of mistakes, the deep conclusion. The pencil is the silent teacher of history. This quote just perfectly nails the journey we've been on in this explainer. Because at the end of the day, the true value of a pencil has nothing to do with its physical form. It's not about the wood, or the clay, or the graphite unearthed by some English storm. The true value is found in the lines it actually allows you to draw on the paper of your life. So what are the real takeaways from this tiny object? Think about its physical features for a second. First, the eraser. It fundamentally teaches us that it is okay to make mistakes. Life, much like sketching out a first draft, involves missteps, and forgiveness is literally built right into the tool. Second, the sharpener. Every time a pencil breaks or gets dull, it has to go through this rough process of being sharpened, only to come out the other side ready to write again. It's basically a masterclass in human resilience. And lastly, it shows us that the simplest things, literally just dirt and carbon, often have the most profound impacts on human history. We went from scratching on cave walls to drafting the blueprints for actual spaceships with this thing. History isn't just locked away in museums, it is literally sitting right there on your desk. We took this tool from a piece of messy, primitive charcoal and turned it into an engineered masterpiece. So I want to leave you with this to chew on. The next time you grab a pencil to scribble down a grocery list or maybe sketch out your next big idea, remember you're holding a literal piece of history. What lines are you going to draw with it? How are you part of this history? Keep a sharp pencil nearby, guys, and keep learning.